The letter was sitting on the kitchen counter when I got home. Plain white envelope. No company logo. No printed label. Just a handwritten address in ink that looked careful, deliberate, the kind of handwriting someone uses when they want to be read clearly. My name was on the front. That part was normal. What wasn't normal was the return address printed in the top left corner. It was also my name, not my wife's name, not a law firm or a hospital or a government office. My name, my full name, written in the return address line like the letter had been sent to me from myself, from an address in a city I had never lived in a state I had visited exactly once 12 years ago, before I ever met my wife. I picked it up, I turned it over. I was still trying to make sense of it when my wife walked into the kitchen, saw what I was holding, and said quietly, almost carefully, "Don't open that letter yet. Not, what is that? Not, where did that come from?" She already knew what it was. She was already controlling when I would be allowed to read it. I set it back on the counter and waited, because the return address had already told me one thing before I opened a single word. Someone out there shared my name, and my wife already knew who. My name is Thomas Ellery. I'm 44. I've been married to my wife Margot for 9 years. We have a son, Ben, who's 12, and a life that I would have described, until that evening, as well understood. A house we've owned for 6 years, careers we're both proud of, a marriage with the ordinary friction of two people sharing a life, and the genuine warmth of two people who actually like each other. What I knew about my own history was simple. I was adopted at 3 years old by a couple in Ohio who raised me well and loved me without qualification. I knew I'd been adopted. That was never hidden from me, but I'd never searched for my biological family. It wasn't avoidance exactly. It was more that the family I had felt complete enough that the question of where I'd come from before Ohio had never felt urgent enough to chase. Margot knew all of this. We'd talked about it early in our relationship, the way you talk about the big shape of your lives when you're still figuring out if you fit together. She knew I was adopted, knew I hadn't searched, knew I carried a kind of comfortable indifference about it that I'd never had any real reason to disturb. The letter on the counter disturbed it. "Don't open it yet," is a strange thing to say to someone holding a letter addressed to them. I asked her why. I asked her what she knew about it. She asked me to sit down first. Over the next 20 minutes, Margot told me something she had been sitting on for 11 months. A year ago, she had decided, on her own without telling me, believing she was doing something kind, to begin quietly looking into my biological background. Nothing invasive, she said. She'd started with a DNA registry, submitted a kit under my name using a sample I didn't know she kept from a medical test I'd taken the previous year. The idea, she explained, was to gather information first, then give me the choice of what to do with it. What came back surprised even her. I had a biological brother. Same father, different mother, 7 years younger than me. His name was also Thomas. Not a nickname or a coincidence. He had been named Thomas by the same biological father who had been in neither of our lives growing up, apparently as some kind of deliberate thread connecting two sons he'd never raised. When the DNA match triggered a contact request through the registry, this other Thomas had written a letter and mailed it directly, addressed with my full name, and returned with his own full name in the corner, because it was also my full name. Margot had intercepted it 3 days earlier. She'd been trying to decide for 72 hours the right way to hand it to me. She gave me time alone to read it. It was 4 pages, handwritten, the same careful script from the return address. He'd known about me for 8 months before he worked up the courage to write. He'd found out about our shared father the same way I was finding out about everything, through Margot's DNA submission, triggering a match that led to more answers than either of them had expected. He wrote about growing up without the man whose name we both carried. He wrote about finding the DNA registry himself 2 years earlier, hoping to find something he could name. He wrote about what it meant to him to discover he had an older brother who apparently hadn't known he existed either. He wasn't asking for anything specific. He said so clearly. He wasn't looking to disrupt a life or manufacture a relationship that wasn't there. He just wanted me to know he existed and to leave a door open that neither of us had been told was there. The last paragraph was short. He wrote that he'd named the letter carefully because he imagined I'd be confused by the return address before I even opened it. And he wanted me to know that the confusion I was feeling was exactly how he'd felt every time he thought about reaching out. Uncertain, slightly off balance, not sure whether the person on the other side of the envelope would want to know what was inside. I read it twice. Then I sat quietly for a long time. When I came out of the study, Margot was on the couch waiting. She looked at me the way people look at someone they care about when they know they may have done a loving thing in a way that wasn't entirely right. I sat down beside her and told her I needed to ask her something first before I told her how I felt about any of it. I asked her why she'd done it without asking me. She said that for years she'd watched me carry the adopted and not searching version of myself with a kind of ease that she'd always admired, but that she'd also wondered whether that ease was genuine peace or whether it was the version of peace that comes from having never had enough information to know what you were missing. She said she hadn't wanted to plant a question I'd never asked. She just wanted to quietly find out if there was anything there and then hand me the choice. She said she should have asked me before she started. She said it as a real apology, not as a justification, and I could hear the difference. I told her she was right. She should have. And then I told her I wasn't certain I would have said yes if she'd asked, which meant there was a version of this where the letter never arrived and I never had a brother I didn't know about, and I wasn't sure that version was better. We sat with that for a while. I wrote back to Thomas the following week, a short letter, careful like his, leaving a door open without making any promises about what was on the other side. It's been 6 months since that envelope was sitting on the counter. Thomas and I have exchanged 4 more letters. We haven't met in person yet. That conversation is still finding the right shape. But there's a correspondence now, something being built slowly between two strangers who share a name and a story they both came into late. I think about Margot's choice a lot, what she did and how she did it, and whether the line between a loving intervention and an overreach is as clear as it feels before you cross it. I don't think she was wrong to want something good for me. I think she was wrong to decide alone when it should have been my decision too. But I also think about the letter, the return address that had my name before I'd even had a chance to read my own. A brother who named himself after the same father neither of us ever knew, and who wrote 4 careful pages because he thought I deserved to know the door was there, even if I never chose to walk through it. Some letters wait on counters for reasons you only understand after you open them. I'm glad I eventually did.